Speaking of Shechianu moments, Rabbi Saphire has returned to us from her sabbatical.
I was going to mention something else.
Oh, well, me first. Rabbi Saphire has returned from sabbatical and will be enlightening us with some words of Torah this evening, and now I will
I'm glad you said
bima.
enlightening, because they're light words of Torah this evening. But I first wanted to extend a yasher koach to our leaders this evening. The first time you've all led together, so we have a new Shabbat band who has appeared this evening. You're leading us so beautifully, thank you. And I was seeing Oren squirm in his seat because he forgot to mention, what, buddy? That he lost another tooth. So, for the Shechianu moment. A few of you may know that I love to garden. For me, it is a practice, a skill to hone, a quiet, reflective, spiritual activity. Gardening can also be completely wondrous or completely frustrating in the simplest of ways. After shoveling and raking, watering, pruning, clipping, and tending, I often just sit in the middle of the dirt. I did a little bit of this in sabbatical. Sit in the middle of the dirt or by the side of the flower bed and gaze at a single leaf or a stem for many minutes at a time, just taking it in. My thoughts usually wander to one breathtaking idea. A simple seed created this beauty. And I've witnessed the opposite too. One act of destruction or lack of action can destroy it too. The marvel lies in the smallest detail of one simple act, one cell division after another. This week, while studying the Torah portion, Parashat Chukat, from the book of Numbers, chapter 20, I noticed a similar concept for the first time. I have to say that this portion has always challenged me theologically, and a few of us in this room have gotten into some debates about it in the past as well. But this newfound idea seemed pretty straightforward to me. Here's the story. The Israelites continue their journey in the wilderness, arriving in the wilderness of Kadesh, where the text simply tells us that Miriam dies and is buried there. The very next verse, almost without a pause, continues, "The community is without water, and they join against Moses and Aaron." And then immediately following that verse, the next verse reads, "The people quarrel with Moses, complaining, saying that they would have already died." How could Moses have brought them to this wretched place only to suffer? How could God lead them out of Egypt to this place only to suffer? Moses and Aaron leave the gathering of people and head to the tent of meeting to convene with God. They fall on their faces while God appears, saying, "Take the rod and assemble the people before that rock over there," I imagine. "And in front of them, Moses, speak to the rock and order it to deliver water. Thus you shall produce water for them and quench their thirst." So this is the famous story of the water from the rock. Except when Moses and Aaron gather the people, the same ones who have just yelled at them and blamed them for their thirst, their emotions, I imagine, are running high. And I can tell it from their words. They say before the people gathered around this rock, and I can hear the tone in their voice in this way. They say, "Listen, you rebels, do you want water from this rock?" So Moses raises his hand with the staff in it, and instead of speaking to the rock, He strikes the rock, not once, but twice, and water gushes from the rock to satisfy the people. But God is far from satisfied. God is angry that Moses does not trust God's instructions and God's presence, especially in front of the people. And in that instant, God punishes Moses, saying that he shall not be the one to enter or to lead the people into the promised land. Our sages help us sort through this passage for deeper meaning. And this is where I sat in awe this week, just like at the edge of my garden, marveling at one simple detail after another. For most of us, when reading this text, focus on the grand story of the water from the rock and whether or not Moses and God act righteously or justly. But to do so, and I've done this in the past as well, misses an important detail that started it all. Do you remember how the story starts? Right in the wilderness of Kadesh, it says, Miriam dies. Full stop. Literally. The death of a righteous being, a prophetess in this case, a sibling, a caregiver, a dear community leader, someone close to us, someone who we admire. The loss is devastating. And for those of us who have experienced the loss of someone close to us or someone so influential in our lives, it is as if our whole world pauses. Jewish tradition even affirms this spiritual and emotional feeling for us as we are commanded to slow down, to stop for 7 days, to sit Shiva, to allow others to come to us, to comfort us, to feed us, to water us. Moses and Aaron's sister has just died, and we hear nothing about a mourning period. And yes, if you're wondering, a precedent has already been established and set for a ritual that has been established before Moses' time by our ancestors, a mourning period and ritual to observe. But instead, the people come immediately to Moses and Aaron and aggressively complain about their lack of water. There is one midrashic detail that is relevant here. The rabbis say that Miriam is the source of the people's water in the desert. It is because of her presence and merit that a well appears wherever the people camp in the wilderness. Miriam is the one who saves her brother from the Nile as a baby and rejoices with her people as they cross the sea of redemption. And as soon as Miriam dies, the well dries up. The people do not appreciate the water and perhaps Miriam's presence until the water disappears. Can you imagine in this moment of mourning, following the death of a dear one, the community rising up against you instead of surrounding you with comfort, blaming you for their struggle? Can you imagine in the midst of mourning being responsible for and bearing the burden of an entire people's well-being? When Moses and Aaron appeal to God for help, I can imagine that God's instructions might go in one ear and out the other, as pain and anger have already overwhelmed them, rightfully so. In the midst of Shiva, the people make demands on Moses and Aaron, and they simply cannot meet them. Our classic commentaries interpret, and God certainly does too, that Moses' rash decision and mistrust of God is reason to deserve punishment and not enter the promised land. Our greatest leader and prophet, and therefore an entire generation, do not make it to the promised land, not necessarily because of Moses and Aaron's judgment or God's consequence, but because the people have acted rashly. Can you see? It's new reading. No matter who is to blame, one moment of action or inaction by the people changes the course of history. It's breathtaking. Just as breathtaking as the seed that is planted or not, or the drop of water that has an entire ripple effect or not. One righteous deed, one righteous seed or not matters. Next week, a few days after that, begins the period of 3 weeks leading up to the Jewish observance of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day that commemorates the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The 3-week mourning period begins on the 17th of Tammuz, because that was the day that the outer wall of the temple was breached. It is said that the temple did not just fall by the way of the Babylonians or the Romans, but it was because of the unrighteous acts between our people. It's as if we are given a warning, a 3-week period to think carefully about our actions. How can we redirect so there will be no breach of righteousness this time? How can we make sure that each of our actions is planted like a seed of goodness, ready to blossom into something even better? I think this is a beautiful intention for us to ponder on this Shabbat, heading into the next week and the following weeks of mourning leading into Tisha B'Av. And summer is a great time for planting and tending, and I pray reflecting on the beauty that we have helped to create. Shabbat Shalom.